The breach. The alarm started at 0347 station time, and Admiral Vroth knew immediately that something was wrong. Not the usual wrong, not a smuggler testing the perimeter or a navigation error from some civilian freighter. This was different. Every system on border station Kethris screamed at once, a cascading wave of warnings that turned the command center into a symphony of panic. "Report," Vroth snapped, his 4 eyes narrowing as he strode toward the central display. Around him, junior officers scrambled at their consoles, their scales flashing the pale blue of confusion. "Sensor breach in grid 7-4, one of them stammered. "Something just entered the forbidden region." Vroth felt his breath catch. The forbidden region. A zone of twisted space and ancient weapons left behind by the predecessors, civilizations so advanced they had vanished before the Dominion even learned to forge metal. No species entered that region. Not pirates. Not explorers. Not even the most desperate refugees. The last fleet that tried had simply disappeared, their distress signals cutting off mid-transmission. "Identification," Vroth demanded. The sensor officer's hands trembled over his console. "That's the problem, Admiral. It's a human vessel." Silence fell across the bridge. Someone laughed nervously, assuming it was a joke. Humans. The newest species to stumble into galactic space, barely a century out from their homeworld. They were known for their stubbornness and their strange obsession with exploration, but their technology was primitive. Their fastest ships took weeks to cross distances the Dominion covered in days. Their weapons were kinetic slugs and chemical explosives, relics from a more barbaric age. "You're certain?" Vroth asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Yes, Admiral. The signature matches human engine output, but..." The officer paused, his throat contracting in confusion. "But the energy readings don't make sense. Nothing in our database suggests humans have ships capable of these speeds." Vroth moved closer to the display, watching the data stream across the screen. The human vessel was deep inside the forbidden region now, moving through a debris field that should have torn any ship apart. Asteroids the size of moons drifted through that zone, their orbits unpredictable and lethal. Dominion warships avoided the area entirely, even with their advanced shielding and predictive algorithms. Yet the human ship moved through it like water flowing around stones. It didn't slow down. It didn't adjust course with the clumsy corrections of inferior navigation. It simply flowed, twisting and banking with a precision that seemed impossible, as if it knew exactly where every piece of debris would be before it arrived. "How long until it exits the region?" Vroth asked. "At current speed." The officer's voice faltered. "Admiral, at current speed it will reach our defensive perimeter in less than 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Vrotha's mind raced. Protocol demanded he report this to High Command immediately, but that would take time to route the transmission, time for the bureaucrats to argue and deliberate. By then the human ship would be here, and Vroth would look like a fool for asking permission to deal with a single primitive vessel. No. He would handle this himself. "Battle stations," he ordered, his voice carrying across the command center. "Activate the defense grid. Charge all primary weapons. And open a channel to that ship." The communications officer nodded, and a moment later the holographic display shimmered to life. Vroth expected to see some nervous human captain, perhaps even an apology for straying into forbidden space. Instead, the figure that appeared was unnervingly calm. The human was male, his face weathered in a way that suggested age and experience. He wore a dark uniform without decoration, and his eyes, those strange forward-facing predator eyes, locked onto Vroth with an intensity that made the Admiral's scales itch. "I am Admiral Vroth of the Dominion 4th Fleet," Vroth began, injecting as much authority into his voice as possible. "You have entered restricted space and violated Dominion territorial law. Power down your vessel immediately and prepare to be boarded." The human didn't flinch. He didn't look worried or intimidated. He simply tilted his head slightly, as if considering something mildly interesting. "Admiral Vroth," the human said, his voice carrying a strange accent but speaking flawless Dominion standard. "I am Captain Chen of the UHSV Revenant. We have no intention of powering down. We suggest you stand down your weapons and clear the approach vector." Vroth felt anger flare in his chest. Suggest? This primitive was suggesting that the Dominion Fourth Fleet stand down. "You are alone, Captain," Vroth said, allowing contempt to creep into his voice. "One ship against a fully armed border station and 3 capital warships. Surrender, or we will open fire." Captain Chen's expression didn't change. "You're welcome to try." The transmission cut. For a moment, Vroth could only stare at the empty hologram. Then his anger crystallized into something cold and focused. This human had just made a fatal mistake. "Target that vessel," Vroth commanded. "All batteries. Fire on my mark." The weapons officer hesitated. "Admiral, we haven't received clearance from High Command to engage." "I said fire." The station's main cannons erupted, sending streams of plasma hurtling toward the human battleship. On the tactical display, Vroth watched the targeting systems lock on, the projectiles closing the distance in seconds. A direct hit. The human ship would be vaporized. Except it wasn't there anymore. The sensors flickered, and suddenly the Revenant appeared 3 kilometers closer, well inside the debris field, as if it had simply stepped sideways through space itself. "What just happened?" Vroth whispered. Before anyone could answer, the human ship vanished again. And reappeared even closer. On the tactical display, the Revenant was no longer retreating. It was advancing, moving through space in a way that violated every law of physics Vroth understood. Not faster than light travel, something else. Something that made his instincts scream danger in a way he hadn't felt since he was young. Captain Chen's voice returned, calm and measured. "Last warning, Admiral. Stand down." Vroth opened his mouth to give the order to fire again. And then the lights went out. The Phantom. Emergency lighting flickered to life across the command center, casting everything in a sickly red glow. Vrotha's console was dead. The tactical display had gone dark. All around him, officers shouted over each other, their voices rising in panic as system after system failed to respond. "Report." Vroth roared, but even as he demanded answers, he felt something cold settling in his chest. This wasn't a power failure. This was something else. "All primary systems offline," the engineering officer called out, his voice cracking. "Backups aren't responding. It's like something just reached into our network and shut everything down." "Impossible," Vroth hissed. The station's systems were isolated, protected by 7 layers of encryption and physical disconnects. No remote hack could penetrate those defenses. It would take hours, maybe days, for even Dominion cyber warfare specialists to break through. The human ship had done it in seconds. "Get me external sensors," Vroth ordered. "I want to know where that ship is." One of the junior officers managed to route a backup feed to a secondary screen. The image was grainy and unstable, but it showed enough. The Revenant hung in space less than 2 kilometers from the station, its dark hull reflecting no light, as if the ship itself was carved from a piece of the void. No engine glow. No heat signature. Just a silhouette that seemed to drink in the surrounding starlight. And it wasn't alone anymore. Small objects were detaching from the battleship, dozens of them, moving with deliberate precision toward the station. Vrotha's throat tightened. Boarding pods. The humans were sending boarding parties. "Seal all airlocks," he commanded. "Deploy security teams to every entry point. If they want this station, they'll have to take it deck by deck." But even as he gave the orders, Vroth knew something was deeply wrong. The boarding pods weren't heading for the airlocks. They were heading for the hull itself, landing on the outer surface like parasites attaching to a host. "Sir," the sensor officer said quietly, his voice hollow with disbelief. "They're cutting through. Cutting through. Through meters of reinforced Dominion battle steel, through composite armor designed to withstand plasma fire and kinetic strikes. The humans were cutting through it like it was paper." Vroth activated the station-wide communication channel. "All security personnel, converge on decks 7 through 12. Repel boarders. Lethal force authorized." The channel crackled with acknowledgments, and Vroth allowed himself a grim moment of satisfaction. The humans might have superior technology, but they were still flesh and blood. Let them try to take a Dominion station by force. His security teams were trained, disciplined, and heavily armed. The first reports came in 2 minutes later. "Contact on deck 9. Multiple hostiles emerging from," the transmission cut off in a burst of static and something that might have been screaming. Then another. "They're not using the corridors. They're phasing through the walls. We can't." Silence. Vroth felt his scales go rigid. Phasing through walls. That was impossible. That was technology the Dominion had theorized about for centuries but never successfully developed. The energy requirements alone would be staggering. "Deck 7 security team, report," Vroth demanded. No response. "Deck 8, report." Static. One by one, his security teams went silent. Not defeated in firefights. Not calling for backup or retreating. Just, gone. As if something had swept through the station and erased them. Vrotha's hands clenched into fists. He had 300 trained soldiers on this station. Where were they? The answer came when the doors to the command center opened. No alarm. No warning. The heavy blast doors that required 3 separate authorization codes simply slid open, revealing the corridor beyond. For a moment, nothing happened. The officers on the bridge stared at the open doorway, weapons drawn, waiting for the enemy to pour through. Instead, they simply appeared. One moment the command center was empty except for Dominion personnel. The next, there were figures standing among them. Humans. 6 of them, materialized out of nothing, wearing armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. No sound. No flash of teleportation energy. They were just there, as if they had always been there, and reality had simply forgotten to notice. Vroth drew his sidearm and fired. The plasma bolt struck the nearest human directly in the chest. The figure didn't stagger. Didn't fall. The energy simply vanished into the armor, dissipating like water on hot stone. The human raised one hand, and Vrotha's weapon disintegrated. Not exploded. Not torn apart. It simply came apart at the molecular level, scattering into dust that drifted to the floor. "Secure the bridge," one of the humans said, their voice distorted by a helmet filter into something that sounded barely human at all. The Dominion officers tried to resist. Some drew weapons, others rushed forward with their natural combat instincts. It didn't matter. The humans moved through them like ghosts, their movements precise and economical. A touch here, a gesture there, and Dominion soldiers simply collapsed, unconscious or paralyzed. Vroth saw one of his best fighters, a decorated combat veteran, swing a powered blade at a human's head. The blade passed through empty air. The human had moved, impossibly fast, and a moment later the veteran was on the ground. In less than 30 seconds, it was over. Vroth found himself on his knees, his limbs refusing to respond, some kind of neural disruptor locking his muscles in place. Around him, the entire command staff was similarly incapacitated. The humans stood among them like statues, unmoving and silent. Then Captain Chen walked onto the bridge. He wasn't wearing armor like the others. Just that same dark uniform, completely unprotected, as if he had simply strolled through the station without encountering any resistance at all. Perhaps he had. Perhaps the entire defense of Border Station Kethris had been irrelevant from the moment the Revenant arrived. Chen stopped in front of Vroth, looking down at the Admiral with those unsettling forward-facing eyes. "Your station is secure," Chen said calmly. "Your weapons are offline. Your communications are blocked. None of your distress signals reached High Command." Vroth tried to speak, but his throat wouldn't cooperate. Chen seemed to notice and gestured to one of his soldiers. The paralysis eased slightly, just enough for Vroth to force words out. What do you want?" "We want," Chen said slowly, "to deliver a message." He gestured toward the main display, and somehow, impossibly, the dead systems flickered back to life. But instead of showing sensor data or tactical information, the screen showed space beyond the station. Empty space. No. Not empty. Vrotha's eyes widened as shapes began to emerge. Not from faster-than-light jumps. Not from any form of travel he recognized. They simply tore through reality itself, rips in space that blazed with light, and through those rips came ships. Dozens of them. Hundreds. A fleet that dwarfed anything Vroth had ever seen, each vessel as dark and predatory as the Revenant, each one appearing in perfect formation as if they had been waiting just beyond the edge of sight. "This is the message," Chen said quietly. "The Dominion believed it knew the galaxy. Believed it understood power. Believed humanity was weak. The fleet continued to grow, more ships pouring through the rifts in space, spreading out across the forbidden region like a tide of darkness." "You were wrong," Chen continued. "We have been in your space for years. In your cities. In your fleets. In your government. Watching. Learning. Waiting." Vroth felt something break inside him. Years. They had been infiltrating the Dominion for years, and no one had noticed. No one had suspected. The reckoning. The human fleet hung in space like a swarm of predators, silent and patient. Vroth could only watch as more rifts tore open across the sector, each one disgorging additional vessels that moved into position with mechanical precision. The scale of it was incomprehensible. This wasn't an expeditionary force. This wasn't even an invasion fleet. This was an extinction event. Captain Chen stood motionless, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the display with the calm detachment of someone who had already seen how this would end. Around him, his soldiers remained perfectly still, their dark armor making them look like statues carved from shadow. "Why?" Vroth finally managed to rasp, his voice hoarse and broken. "Why reveal yourselves now? Why not simply destroy us from within?" Chen turned to look at him, and for the first time, Vroth saw something almost like sympathy in those alien eyes. "Because," Chen said quietly, "we wanted you to understand." He gestured toward the display again, and the view changed. Now it showed archived footage, recordings that Vroth recognized with growing horror. Dominion vessels attacking human colonies. Dominion soldiers executing human civilians. Trade negotiations where Dominion ambassadors treated humanity like children, dismissing their concerns, exploiting their inexperience. For 50 years, Chen continued, the Dominion treated humanity as insignificant. "You denied us fair trade agreements. You seized our territory under pretexts of protection. You butchered our people and called it peacekeeping." Vroth wanted to protest, wanted to say that those had been isolated incidents, rogue commanders exceeding their authority. But the footage kept playing, incident after incident, pattern after pattern. The Dominion hadn't just dismissed humanity. It had actively worked to keep them weak, to exploit them, to ensure they would never become a threat. "We tried diplomacy," Chen said. "We tried compromise. We tried appealing to your better nature." He paused. "You taught us that the galaxy doesn't respect mercy. It respects power." On the display, the view shifted back to real-time footage. Vroth watched as human ships moved through Dominion space with impunity, their stealth systems so advanced that defense grids simply didn't register their presence. He saw Dominion capital ships trying to respond, launching fighters and preparing weapons, only to have their systems shut down the moment they powered up. One by one, entire battle groups went dark. Your encryption. Chen gestured at one of his soldiers. We broke it 6 years ago. Your weapons systems. We have backdoors in every major shipyard. Your supposedly secure communication networks. We've been listening to High Command's transmissions since before most of your current admirals were promoted. Vroth felt something collapse inside him. 6 years. The Dominion had been compromised for 6 years, and no one had known. Every secret, every strategy, every defensive position, all of it exposed. How? Vroth whispered. How did we not see this? Because, Chen said, and now there was something cold in his voice, you believed your own propaganda. You believed humanity was primitive. Believed we were generations behind you technologically. You saw what you wanted to see. One of Chen's soldiers approached, carrying a data tablet. Chen took it and held it out so Vroth could see the screen. It showed a schematic, a Dominion warship, the same class as 3 of the vessels stationed at this border outpost. The DSV Carthan, DSV Mareth, and DSV Fokker, Chen read off. All 3 currently docked at this station. All 3 retrofitted 12 months ago at the Dominion's primary shipyard on Kelver Prime. He looked up at Vroth. Do you know who designed those retrofits? Vrotha's throat went dry. A subsidiary company owned by a Dominion contractor, Chen continued. A contractor whose board of directors includes 3 humans operating under Dominion identities. They've been in place for 8 years. The implications crashed over Vroth like a wave. The humans hadn't just infiltrated the Dominion. They had become part of it, embedded so deeply that they were building the ships, writing the code, designing the weapons. Everything the Dominion thought was secure had been compromised from the inside. You're looking at this as sabotage, Chen said, setting the tablet aside. But it was much simpler than that. We just helped. We designed better engines. More efficient weapons. Stronger hulls. The Dominion was grateful for the improvements. His expression hardened. You never asked where the innovations came from. You just assumed your own superiority. On the display, a new transmission appeared. High Command, finally responding to the catastrophe unfolding across the sector. A Dominion High Admiral appeared, his scales flashing the deep purple of rage and fear. This is High Admiral Kelthran to all border sectors. We are under coordinated attack by human forces. All fleets are ordered to converge on. The transmission cut off. Not with static. Not with jamming interference. It simply stopped, as if someone had reached across the galaxy and pressed a button. Chen didn't even look at the screen. We control your communication networks now. High Command can't coordinate a response because they can't talk to their own fleets. Half of your capital ships won't even respond to orders because our people are already aboard them. Vroth felt true despair for the first time in his long military career. This wasn't a battle. This wasn't even a war. This was an execution, planned and prepared with terrifying patience. What happens now? Vroth asked, his voice barely a whisper. Chen was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke again, his voice carried something that might have been regret. Now, he said, the Dominion learns what it feels like to be powerless. He gestured, and the view on the display changed one final time. It showed Earth, humanity's homeworld, as seen from orbit. Vroth had seen intelligence briefings on the planet, a single world with limited resources, its people barely unified, its technology centuries behind Dominion standards. Except that wasn't what the display showed now. Earth was surrounded by massive orbital structures, stations and shipyards that dwarfed anything the Dominion had ever built. Defense platforms bristled with weapons that made Dominion artillery look primitive. And beyond Earth, spreading throughout the human home system, were fleets. Thousands of ships, maybe tens of thousands, all marked with the same designation as the Revenant. You thought we were weak, Chen said softly. You thought we were scattered and desperate. You thought we needed the Dominion's protection. He turned to face Vroth fully. We've been building, Admiral. For 3 generations. Every insult, every exploitation, every human life the Dominion took, we remembered. And we prepared. Vroth stared at the display, at the impossible sight of human military power that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist. 3 generations. Humanity had been planning this for 3 generations, all while pretending to be inferior, pretending to need the Dominion's guidance. The Revenant entering the Forbidden Region was indeed a signal, Chen continued. But not to you. It was a signal to our forces embedded throughout Dominion space. An activation code. Everything you're seeing now, the fleet movements, the sabotage, the communication blackouts, it was all triggered the moment my ship crossed into that zone. You're going to destroy us, Vroth said. It wasn't a question. No, Chen replied, and there was something in his voice that was somehow worse than the promise of destruction. We're going to do exactly what the Dominion did to us. We're going to take your territory. We're going to control your trade. We're going to station our ships in your space and call it protection. He paused. And you're going to accept it, because you'll have no choice. Vroth understood then. Death would have been kinder. The Dominion would survive, but as a shadow of itself, dependent on human technology, human protection, human permission to exist. Everything the Dominion had done to humanity would be done to them, and they would be powerless to resist. Your High Command will receive terms within the hour, Chen said, turning away. Surrender will be unconditional. Resistance will be crushed. The Dominion's age of dominance is over. He gestured to his soldiers, and they began to move toward the exit. The paralysis holding Vroth eased slightly, just enough for him to move his head, to watch as the humans prepared to leave. Captain, Vroth called out, his voice cracking. Chen paused but didn't turn around. How long? How long have you been planning this? Chen was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost sad. Since the first human colony the Dominion burned, he said. Since the first time your empire taught us that mercy was weakness. You wanted to know how we did this, Admiral. You taught us. Every cruelty, every exploitation, every lesson in power, you were our teachers. He walked through the doors, his soldiers following like shadows. Vroth was left alone on the bridge, surrounded by his incapacitated crew, staring at the display as the human fleet continued to spread across Dominion space like a tide that could not be stopped. In the distance, more Dominion vessels went dark. More stations fell silent. More outposts ceased to exist. The Dominion had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. It had believed itself invincible, its technology supreme, its power absolute. It had taken humanity less than 3 generations to prove them wrong. And as Vroth watched his civilization crumble on the screen, he understood with perfect clarity what Chen had meant. The humans hadn't come to destroy the Dominion. They had come to replace it. The age of Dominion was over. The age of humanity had begun. And there was nothing anyone could do to stop it.